King Charles has finally slammed the royal door in Harry and Meghan's faces, and the most devastating part is that this time, the decision is being presented as permanent. After years of fractured relationships, private appeals, public accusations, and painful unanswered questions, Charles has reportedly drawn a line that destroys any hope of a simple restoration. There will be no quiet return to the positions Harry and Meghan once occupied, no discreet reset negotiated behind palace doors, and no blurred arrangement allowing the Sussexes to move between royal privilege and independent celebrity life. Charles allegedly read the final briefing twice before setting it down, looking exhausted by the impossible collision between fatherhood and duty. This was not merely a ruling concerning two famous public figures. Harry was still the younger son Charles loved, despite the distance, suspicion, and resentment that had poisoned their relationship. But love, the king apparently concluded, could no longer erase consequences. Reopening negotiations would revive every explosive argument surrounding loyalty, confidentiality, commercial independence, public criticism, and who possessed the right to speak for the crown. Ending the uncertainty might protect the monarchy, but it forced Charles to accept a heartbreaking truth. Protecting the institution meant closing the official door on Harry and Meghan. Harry reportedly received the decision privately and initially said nothing. Meghan watched as the expression on his face tightened, because this was no temporary pause that could be reconsidered after another emotional telephone call or private family meeting. Royal duty had never been just employment for Harry. It represented identity, belonging, and the position once held beside William. A personal relationship with Charles might still survive, but reconciliation would no longer provide a hidden route back into official royal life. Charles made the distinction brutally clear. Family trust could potentially be rebuilt, but the palace would not repeatedly negotiate status. Harry could remain a son. Meghan could remain connected to the wider family, but neither would automatically recover the roles they surrendered. Why did Charles finally harden? According to the account, one private incident convinced Charles that another attempted reset might trigger an even deeper crisis. Charles believed loving Harry and restoring his royal position were separate matters. Harry viewed that distinction as painfully artificial. Meghan understood that returning under palace restrictions might mean surrendering the independence they had fought to create. Meanwhile, William stood between the present crisis and the future monarchy, knowing the consequences could eventually become his responsibility. The emotional trap became impossible to ignore when Charles reportedly told a trusted aide that refusing Harry a royal role must never be interpreted as rejecting Harry as a son. Yet status and belonging had been tangled together throughout Harry's life, meaning losing one inevitably felt like losing both. After receiving the message, Harry reached toward his phone and suddenly stopped. Meghan noticed but remained silent until Harry admitted that ceremonial privilege was not what wounded him most. The deeper agony came from realizing that the palace considered the old version of his life finished. Meghan then asked the question nobody could escape. Even if Harry and Meghan were welcome back, could they truly live under tighter restrictions governing public statements, commercial projects, and access to private royal conversations? William carried another burden entirely. William reportedly warned Charles that bringing Harry back before rebuilding trust would not heal the conflict, it would simply drag the same conflict back inside the monarchy. Any unstable compromise created by Charles could become a ticking time bomb waiting for William during the next reign. Then came the private Windsor meeting, the encounter that allegedly became the true point of no return. There were no cameras, public statements, or cheering crowds, only Charles, Harry, and William trying to define trust after years of damage. Charles had authorized the discussion because some limited form of service still appeared possible, but any return required strict boundaries. William entered cautiously, believing confidential conversations, commercial partnerships, public criticism, and royal responsibility could not remain dangerously blurred. Harry immediately felt the conditions closing around him. Harry argued that returning under heavy restrictions would place him physically inside the family while permanently branding him as someone unworthy of trust. Then, Harry asked the question Charles had apparently feared: why must Harry prove loyalty before the family proved theirs? When Harry demanded to know whether the monarchy had protected him when pressure became unbearable, Charles answered that protection and agreement were not always identical, but the next demand shattered whatever hope remained. Harry wanted written assurance that another future disagreement could never result in his removal from official duties. William objected immediately, insisting that no individual could demand immunity from the sovereign's authority. Harry pushed back, declaring that he could not return to a system where his position might disappear the moment another conflict erupted. Harry shoved his chair backward, stared directly at Charles, and asked whether he was genuinely being invited home or merely being managed. William attempted to return the conversation to trust, but Harry had heard enough and left before Charles could provide the answer he desperately wanted. Charles remained inside Windsor with William, visibly shaken by the explosive realization that they were no longer negotiating duties. They were fighting over two completely incompatible meanings of trust. Harry demanded security before returning. William insisted trust must come before security, and Charles suddenly understood that forcing those positions together could destroy whatever remained of the family relationship. But when Harry later demanded one final private answer, Charles could hide behind palace language no longer, and the sentence waiting to be delivered would close the royal door forever. When Harry finally faced Charles again, there were no advisors, secretaries, or carefully prepared documents standing between them. Harry wanted one direct answer. Was the return merely delayed? Or had the old path disappeared forever? Charles listened as Harry described how royal service had shaped his identity long before the departure, interviews, and public accusations. Then came the answer Harry had dreaded. Charles said Harry would always be his son, but affection could not restore an official position while trust, responsibility, and competing public identities remained unresolved. Harry immediately asked whether William had influenced the ruling, but Charles refused to shift responsibility onto William. The decision belonged to Charles alone. Harry rose before the conversation ended, but Charles asked Harry to remain seated for one more minute. Then Charles delivered the devastating verdict: the palace would not continue reopening negotiations about restoring Harry and Meghan as senior working royals. Harry remained silent as the reality became undeniable. This was no longer a negotiation. Charles had chosen clarity over hope, but beneath that painful decision lurked a much larger fear. Charles was not deciding only what kind of father to become. Charles was deciding what kind of monarchy William would inherit. Allowing Harry and Meghan to return without a completely new framework could create two rival centers of royal influence, one operating under palace discipline and another maintaining an independent commercial identity. William warned Charles that royal positions could not repeatedly change according to private reconciliation, family tension, or whether two brothers happened to be speaking during a particular year. Harry's future could not depend upon the emotional condition of that relationship. If Charles postponed the decision, Charles would not eliminate the crisis. Charles would simply hand it to William. After a heavy silence, Charles said the same unresolved problem would not be abandoned for the next reign. That sentence settled everything. Private relationships might change, but official royal status would no longer remain permanently open for negotiation. Meghan's position made the conflict even sharper. Any renewed role would require tighter restrictions around commercial activity, public statements, and access to internal royal information. Yet Meghan and Harry had already built an independent life. Charles finally recognized that no arrangement could satisfy every demand. William needed stability, Harry wanted belonging, and Meghan wanted autonomy. One need would inevitably surrender to another. And when palace planning continued without any future position reserved for Harry, the abstract ruling suddenly became brutally real. There would be no gradual restoration, no working schedule, and no pathway returning Harry to the position once occupied beside William. Harry and Meghan could still receive private invitations, attend certain ceremonies, or visit family members, but none of those moments would indicate a return to official service. Harry struggled with that separation because every warmer conversation with Charles had once preserved hope that personal healing might reopen professional doors. Meghan warned Harry that chasing a vanished version of royal life could leave Harry trapped between two worlds. Harry reread the message, locked the phone, and noticed the one detail the public fury might overlook: nothing prevented Harry from returning as a son. That realization changed the emotional meaning of the ruling. Charles had ended ambiguity without erasing family contact, while William would no longer inherit an unresolved battle. When Charles and Harry spoke privately again, neither argued about titles, duties, schedules, or conditions. Harry admitted that restoration had become proof that the family still wanted Harry. Charles explained that love and office had never meant the same thing. Charles could not restore the former role, but Charles refused to accept permanent distance from Harry or the grandchildren as the price of protecting the monarchy. Harry finally stopped fighting the ruling and asked whether future conversations could happen without becoming negotiations. Charles agreed. Public reaction nevertheless turned painful clarity into explosive rejection. Headlines declared no royal return, while supporters divided into furious camps. Harry believed the coverage made it appear that Charles had closed every door, but Meghan reminded Harry that Charles had closed negotiations over royal duty, not family contact. William did not celebrate because this was never a personal victory. Harry remained wounded, Meghan remained cautious, William inherited greater certainty, and Charles accepted the sadness of the final outcome. The former royal arrangement was over, yet the family door remained unlocked, leaving one haunting question behind: can they rebuild anything meaningful after finally accepting that the past will never return?